Now, earlier I was joined by the UN Women Nigeria and ECOWAS country representative Comfort Lamptey and also Aderonke-Bello of the Fame Foundation. And we spoke about how the UN, EU and other international organizations are using football and sports as a social vehicle to fight gender-based violence.
Gender-based violence, gender-based violence covers a spectrum of violence that are committed against, oftentimes, women and girls. We know that men can be victims of violence against gender-based violence, and they are, but the majority of cases are against women and girls, and they range from domestic violence, domestic abuse in the home, which oftentimes affects women, but also we know that children are often victims of abuses as well, to sexual violence, sexual abuse, so with what we're seeing in the world of football, clearly it's a manifestation of what is going on in the wider society. We have seen, you said it's almost a pandemic, but actually we're calling it a twin pandemic because we're going through the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has also laid bare a lot of the issues of gender-based violence that's really deeply entrenched in society. During the height of the lockdown, some of the service providers were reporting close to 150% increases in cases of gender-based violence in different states across the country. Many of them were domestic violence because you had a situation where abusers were stuck in the same place with the women and girls who couldn't escape. But there were also lots of cases of sexual abuse, lots of cases of abuse of young girls, lots of cases of fathers abusing their daughters. So I think this is a deep-seated problem, and I think we all saw that at one stage, His Excellency Mr. President actually spoke out against this, and all the governors of the Federation at the Governors Forum actually declared a state of emergency, and we still have that state of emergency now against this twin pandemic that Nigeria and indeed a lot of the world is facing. So it's a huge problem, and really one that requires all of us, all hands to be on deck, and I don't think any segment of society is immune from it, and so we have to openly admit, and then that's the first step to addressing the problem.
Very interesting. But I'll ask that you hold your thoughts as we bring in Aderonke-Bello, who is in our offsite studios. Now, Ronke, indeed has, been involved in different projects, and she's, her foundation, Fame Foundation, we know, has been involved in a whole lot. But then, well, just before we get to Ronke, well, let's also talk about it. Now, there are quite a number of social tools that can be used, to advance discussions, arguments, and also, well, to challenge, sexual-based violence. But your organization, and then also many other organizations, have decided to use sports. Can you tell us the reason why?
Well, sports is one medium that we can use, and of course we know that so many young people and even older people follow the sports very closely.
Very true.
And there are a lot of influential actors in the sports field who can also influence some of the mindsets, these negative mindsets and attitudes that need to change about gender-based violence. So as UN Women in June 2019, we actually signed a memorandum of understanding with FIFA, essentially to look at how we could work closely together to promote gender equality. And so we're using that.
I'll apologize for indeed bridging that thoughts there, but then we have to go on a commercial break, but then we will come back and, of course, continue the discussion. So time for us to go on a commercial break. You're watching Global Sports Report with me, Ferdinand Aderonke. Now, welcome back. You're watching Global Sports Report with me, Ferdinand Aderonke, and we have been discussing sexual-based violence and indeed using sports to advocate for victims and also using sports as a tool to indeed preach peace. Now, I'm not alone in the studio. Well, I have been joined by the country representative, Women Nigeria and also ECOWAS, the UN country representative. I must also add Comfort Lamptey. And then also Aderonke-Bello is in our offsite studios. And quickly, Ronke, let's talk about sports. Now, you know, what exactly do you think on, or how much effect do you think sports has in reaching out to victims, and not just victims, and indeed pushing out the message against sexual-based violence and also child abuse, which FIFA indeed recently added?
Yeah, thank you, Ferdinand. You know, as we know that Nigeria is heterogeneous in nature, and the only thing that unifies us as a country is sport, undoubtedly football. So this is why I think sports is a very good tool because of the unifying factor to preach any kind of message we want to preach, talk about gender equality and of course gender-based violence, which has tripled since lockdown due to COVID-19 pandemic. And also, as we look, according to research available to us, the perpetrators of gender-based violence are men. And as we know that a lot of men, let's say out of 10 men, 8 of 10 male follow sports, either by participation or by followership. So it's a very, very vital tool and an avenue to reach out to these people, to reach out to perpetrators, to, you know, preach the message.
Interesting. Well, let's come back to Comfort, who's with us in the studios. Now, let's quickly talk about the UN Women and the efforts that you have put down, well, since you signed this agreement with FIFA and then some other organizations.
Okay, so we, as I was saying before the break, we signed the Memorandum of Understanding with FIFA last year. and we are now going full steam into operationalizing it. And we highlighted 3 ways in which we could address these issues of gender equality in sports. The first is the whole area of the sports policy development. Because, you know, as you yourself said, one approach is to look at how we could use these incredible role models in the sporting field to actually speak about these issues. The other aspect of it is to look at the internal practices of many of these sporting bodies in the sports arena, because we need to make sure that in the world of football, the women footballers are accorded the same opportunities, the same.
Very safe.
So there's an internal outlook as well as the external aspect of it. And so the sports policy development really is one aspect. The other aspect is to look at how we could team up to support projects, sustainable projects that really address some of these cultural and barriers to women's empowerment. And then the third level is about the campaign, how we mobilize both sports personalities, the private sector, our own goodwill ambassadors in the UN to all push to highlight the issues of gender equality. So those are the 3 main ways in which we're looking to operationalize it. And here in Nigeria, we've actually started conversation with the Nigerian Federation, and we've come up with a number of avenues. Of course, we talked about the Safe Home campaign, which FIFA has launched with the EU and WHO, and we've had conversations with our sister agency, WHO, as well as FIFA, because we would also like to support that effort and see that as part of the broader interventions we're promoting in Nigeria to address gender-based violence. And so we've started our conversation with FIFA, and we also want to use the campaign that UN Women has been promoting globally, the He for She campaign, which is a campaign where we look at how men can stand up and be advocates and champions of gender equality. And so we also hope that through the coming together the He for She campaign and the FIFA at the country level, we will also be able to hear more male voices, more male champions speak out against issues of gender-based violence and the need to promote women's rights, including the rights of women in the sporting field as well. Interesting.
Now let's go back to Ronke, who has got some experience also as a sports journalist. And well, interesting, Ronke, but let's talk about the prevalence of this violence. Now, if there's one situation we know is the fact that, you know, it often comes with some form of a denial first, well, people not admitting that this is actually a problem. But based on the works that have been done by your NGO, well, talk to us about the prevalence of this situation. Now, how much of a plague is this in sports? Just like Comfort has highlighted the fact that, well, we're trying to see how well we can correct the ills outside, but then also in sports, well, there have been talks of victimization and abuse also.
Okay, thank you, Ferdinand. In 2016, when the women's Super Falcons won the African Women's World Cup, I led the campaign, a protest when they were not paid. After winning the trophy, the girls were denied their rights. They were not paid their dues. And they first of all started with a sit in their hotel protest. Then after that, I went to their camp. I said to them, girls, let's get on the street. We need to let the world know what's happening to us. Because if it was the Super Eagles that won a continental trophy, by now they will be, you know, celebrated widely. And you are here denied of your rights and all of that. So, you know, I went to the market. I got a cardboard tempo, wrote on it, went to the hotel, got the girls together. Then we hit the streets, we protested. And guess what? They were paid within 48 hours. Our blessed memory, that time the chief of staff to President Muhammadu Buhari, late Abba Kyari, came to us while we were protesting then, and he promised to pay, and they were paid within, I think, 48 hours then. You know, these are the things that is ongoing, and we do not accept it, especially in sports. In football especially. I think that we need to talk out more, we need to speak out more, women need to come together to also fight for the rights of women in sport, because a lot of rights denial, discrimination, lack of remuneration, and all of that is ongoing, and it's not fair. It's not acceptable, and we're not going to take it. So this is why, as an individual, this is why, as an organization, we are fighting, we are asking for the rights of women in sport, and also using sport, which is a unifying factor in the country today, football especially, the #1 sport in Nigeria, to demand for the rights of women, to seek to end gender-based violence. We are not going to take it, and we're not going to stop using sport as a tool to fight this pandemic, this GBV pandemic.
Interesting, Aderonke. Now let's come back to Comfort, who is with us in the studios. Now, most times, or permit me to ask that most times we'll tend to link, these issues concerning sexual-based violence to issues, surrounding customs and then also traditions and all that. Now, we know about the campaign in sports, but then aside sports, are we doing enough to ensure that, yes, issues like customs have been spoken to? Well, people who should address these issues definitely listen to us.
Yes, no, thank you. I think it's an important point. Indeed, from our standpoint as UN Women, we work with countries, and if I take Nigeria, Nigeria as part of the community of nations has signed on to all the global commitments to promote gender equality. So part of our job is to also work with the Nigerian government to periodically report, as countries are required to report, on how they are promoting women's rights. And so we support the reporting processes. And then at the end of after you sign an international agreement, you have to translate it into your national policy. The United Nations, and it's not just UN Women, but the United Nations family in Nigeria, together with the European Union and the Nigerian government, are actually currently working on a very important initiative. It's called the Spotlight Initiative, and it's really about putting a spotlight on issues of gender-based violence. It's being implemented more specifically in 6 states, but it's a national initiative, and it's looking at the issues around changing negative social norms and practices, as you mentioned, but also supporting the policy framework, because policies are important because they provide a framework to protect victims. And Nigeria has a law, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, which was passed in 2015. True. But hasn't been domesticated in many states. So we are actually working to support that. But we're also working with some of the gatekeepers, the community gatekeepers, those who are the custodians of these norms and cultural values that sometimes don't uphold women's rights. So traditional leaders, for instance, are very much one of the key stakeholders under the Spotlight Initiative that we're working with. Recently, the Council of Traditional Leaders in Africa was established purposely to look at how traditional leaders can also support some of the efforts to address gender-based violence. So we're very excited to also be working with them. And then, of course, as I mentioned, male engagement through the He for She campaign and others. It's all about changing attitudes and perceptions. And then we're also supporting women's organizations, because they are the front line. They are the ones providing the services. They are the ones doing the advocacy. They are the ones highlighting the need to promote women's rights. So it's an intervention that is targeting different stakeholders, and we're also looking forward to working very closely with the private sector going forward to look at how all of the multi-sectoral approach can be brought to bear to address this. And we're seeing some progress. We've saw, for instance, since the declaration of the state of emergency, more states are actually now domesticating the Violence Against Persons Act. We've seen some practices being stopped through the intervention of traditional leaders. In Cross River, for instance, a practice where young girls would be were given away to pay a debt for family, money, women, that the traditional leaders have come together to say they want to put an end to that. So I think change is coming, change will come, and but it requires all of us to work together, and certainly the policy framework, getting that right is key, and then also working with women's civil society organizations.